Namaste, yogis. Welcome to Meet a Yogi with Kara Thorsen. Kara, welcome.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for the welcome.
Kara Thorsen and I are talking about avoiding avoidance. And Kara Thorsen is an Iyengar yogi up in Montreal, Canada. She is the founder of Yoga Equanimity, the yoga studio, and also now doing Airbnb experiences on Meet the Resistance. So we did actually a whole thing about that, which we'll link to in the videos below, or you can talk a little bit about that at the end. But today we're talking about avoiding avoidance. So Kara, how did we end up with this topic?
I don't want to. I'm avoiding it. Well, we kind of ended up with this topic because I had an experience over Christmas that really shifted me into a new mentality for this year. And the new mentality this year was clean and clear. Just, I want every conversation I have, every action I do to be very clean and clear. And in essence, that's avoiding the bigger problem later that usually we get by avoiding the problem at its initial phases. So I thought, okay, well, maybe that would be appropriate for us to speak about. And who knows, maybe a very short topic. We may be able to expand it for the hour.
I want to know a little bit about how you feel that yoga has played a part in you changing this idea that you had about, noticing that you, first of all, observing, what role did it play in observing that you were avoiding things? And then what role did it play in becoming more clear about changing your perspective on it?
Well, in the Yoga Sutras, I think it's the second chapter, maybe it's the first chapter actually, that any pains that we have are to be avoided for the future. So you can and you should avoid those future pains. And so avoidance is already part of the Yoga Sutras, but again, avoidance in its true sense that stop making things more complicated than they need to be. You've already had the experience, learn from the experience and apply it to avoid the bigger problems. So avoidance is always in our practice, same as detachment, same as all of these other things. But my experience that happened for me is I was brought to, or that flipped my switch. I was brought to Dominican Republic this year for Christmas to train a colleague of mine. And so I had initially thought it was going to be just a simple training that he was bringing me to train him for a week in asana, 4 hours a day and then that would be it. But when we got there, or the night before we left, he said, "Do you know why I'm bringing you?" And I said, "Well, because you trust me as your teacher." And he said, "No, I'm bringing you because I've led a really selfish life. I've been a selfish man and I want to become a better man. And I know that you're going to hold me accountable to that." And that floored me because all of a sudden it meant that my teaching went from this level and it had to be brought up to this level because I was actually the practicant of my teaching. So then if I was going to be the woman there that had every chair pulled out and every drink brought, and it meant I had to require something of him that I'd never required of myself or of someone else. So this whole conversation kind of melded, and it was a really nice.
I want to pause there for a moment because of my interest in bringing what we're doing at Sadhana specifically to yoga teachers about this aspect where, as a teacher, now your teaching has to go deeper in order for you to bring that teaching to someone else. And I think that's why we need to continue to push to practice teaching and all of the struggles that we go through in order to teach. I just think it's so worth it because when you teach professionally, it elevates your teaching and it elevates your practice.
Absolutely. When you're I'm a student when I'm teaching. I'm watching everybody in that room and seeing the result of what instruction or cue I give. And there were many times in the beginning where I would give an instruction and everybody did it, but it was not at all what I was looking for them to do. So it's like, okay, Kara, clarity of speech, got to figure that one out.
Yes.
And, you know, so it was an interesting experience in the sense that it brought me to clarify some things about myself as well, and raising my own standards for myself. Not that I think I have low standards or anything like that, but actually standing my ground on certain perspectives. And it was, so when I came back, it was the mentality that I needed to shift into, okay, clean and clear, avoid the bigger problems, you know, and it's worked out so far. Yeah.
So what did you notice that you were avoiding at this point where you were asked to come and teach and then told that the reason was because you were somebody who would call him to the mat on his own, you know, hold him to a higher standard? So, at what point did you start to see avoidance as an issue, and where you had been before?
I would say they were two separate issues. I don't necessarily think I saw anything straightforward that I was avoiding, but you know, that's the whole problem with avoidance, right? It's very vague. We don't know we're avoiding a problem. We don't know we're avoiding a habit. We don't know we're avoiding it until it's so in our face that it's a problem now that we have to deal with. So I wouldn't say that was where I think my initial having to change for clean and clarity was because I had been avoiding. And again, it was murky situation. So it wasn't necessarily avoiding with deliberate intent to not have the conversation. It was kind of allowing a situation to be that became then too big for me to fix. So I said, I'm entering this year with clarity of speech, clean and clear on everything, so that last year isn't dragged into this year, because I can't have that. So I would say the avoidance and the clean and clear were two separate topics that ended up joining in and out.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this, because I can see that in your mind, clean and clear and avoiding avoidance are really connected, but I don't necessarily see them like there's not like, okay, how does that tie together? And I'm curious, you know, like I want to understand how these two ideas of being so clear as being the opposite of avoidance it's how you're describing it. Mm-hmm. And I want to understand how you came to see that. It's like, to me, the way you describe it almost reminds, I can remember at a point where I was really working with back bends, and a lot of people will say back bends are about fear. And I started to feel that back bends really were about faith. And I started to see faith as like this flip inversion to fear. Mm-hmm. And it became quite clear in my mind as a result of my practice. So it seems like a similar thing where you've started to see avoidance as being sort of murky and confused, and then clean and clear as being the opposite. And I'm just, you know, like it doesn't, to me, it's not like just a obvious opposite. So I'm kind of curious if you could expand a little more on it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I see, you know, there's day-to-day things. I can't speak specifically for myself more or less, because I don't see those, or I don't have any specific examples. I guess that's the thing. But it's more, you know, I see situations that could have been remedied with a conversation, but the conversation was avoided. And so, you know, we become, if you don't look to repair or bridge that gap, then the gap gets larger, or we become the break. And then by the time you do come to repair the situation, the break is so fabricated or ingrained that it's going to be a whole lot harder. Right. Where initially we just went after the solution and became solution-based, then many of our problems would be avoided. And right. So you can avoid your problems by not avoiding them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that you're saying that you see that you need to insist on clarity from the beginning in order to not allow a situation to become more confused. And we have a question. Joe said, have you noticed any specific sensation or breath pattern that alerts you when you are avoiding. So is there a physical sensation that you're aware of that feels like avoidance?
I would say the first pattern to avoiding would be looking away. I think that physically, wherever the eyes are drawn, if we know that we have a problem, the first thing we're going to do is the eyes will travel away from the problem. And then after we regather our senses, then we'll be drawn back to the problem and have the conversation. But I would say physically, the first nervous system reaction would be eyes to move away. Maybe it would be breath. But I would say the first thing would be look away.
Is there, or have you been doing any practices like K-trick, eye gazing techniques, or focusing on a point in your practice in order to pay more attention to your eyes and where they are focusing?
I usually just keep a solid gaze when I'm practicing. So that wouldn't. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I wouldn't say I hold a steady gaze or focus on one thing or the other. If it's a balancing pose, then I'm going to want to keep a look. But I wouldn't say I'm focused on anything. I just have that gaze where you're outward, but you're really figuring out what's happening inside. Yeah.
So I was saying disassociating is equal to looking away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think avoiding and disassociating, it sounds like very much in the same
category.
Yeah.
Same category. And you see people continuously do that same thing, and they drive themselves into ruin because they can't be clean and clear. They can't have that conversation. And whether the issue is someone else or whether the issue is themselves or a situation or what have you, they can't seem to meet that resistance to overcome. And they avoid the resistance. And a lot of us do. The resistance comes and it provokes a response. And for many of us, that response is avoidance. But if you don't deal with it now, it's going to come back for you later.
It's kind of a subtle one too, because it's easy to avoid the avoidance. It's easy to pretend it's not there. Mm-hmm. And so when there's something where there's an obvious conflict, it's you at some point need to address it, or everybody notices that. But if you're just not discussing something, then or just not talking about it, it's very easy to just continue not to have those.
The elephant is still in the room. And so okay, okay, your choice. We can have the conversation or we can't. But we have to deal with our problems. We have to meet the resistance. And again, that all comes into my whole philosophy.
I heard two different versions of this. I heard avoidance between people, like in conversations, and a need to have a conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. And then I also heard kind of an avoiding of a situation in your own life where it's just yourself, not necessarily in a conversation or with another person. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to break those two apart, because I think each of them could be their own video conference call. But, first let's talk about just within a person, what are some of the steps that you're taking right now in order to create more clarity quicker with somebody, in order to make sure that you're not just ignoring a situation that's starting to become a bigger situation?
I ask for the conversation straight out. Yeah, I mean, if I know that there's an elephant in the room that hasn't been discussed and I want to remedy that situation, I'll say, for my own self, I need to address this topic. And then I'll leave it to them to have the conversation or not. And then, so if the situation gets avoided after I've expressed an interest in finding resolution, what can you do, really? I don't feel it's my place to badger someone for it, because not having that conversation is also very clean and clear. In a sense, that's clean and clear as well. Okay, the conversation's not going to happen, Kara, so you have your answer. Whether it's the one you wanted or not, you still have a response that's clean and clear. So we have to find our terms with things. We have to decide what that is. And even if it doesn't go the way that we had hoped or the way that we would like, it's still a response, and it's still the response we asked for. So
right. That's fascinating. And I also think it's compassionate, because not everybody's ready to confront a situation. Just because you are doesn't mean that they are. And I think it's compassionate to say, look, I recognize this and I want to bring your attention to it. And then also if they're saying, I'm not ready to talk about that you can choose to back away. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean just because you've expressed a discomfort or a desire for clarity doesn't mean that you have to hound the other person to a point where they're feeling uncomfortable with you.
Yeah, because it's clear. It's clean. It's clear that conversation can't be had by that person at this moment. And that's okay. But now at least the ambiguity is gone. We both know our place. We both know exactly, what's happened, and then it's so the elephant in the room can be pushed out, because now it's not there anymore. The recognition of the problem has been addressed. Whether it's been diagnosed and converted to a different situation is another story, but it's been addressed.
Joe says, not sure this needs to be a part of this conversation, but the elephant in the room is Ganesha, the obstacle, and the remedy is to make offerings to the obstacle instead of avoiding it. So we've been talking about Ganesh this year as, kind of our spirit animal here at Sadhana. And we had an earlier conversation about removing obstacles, and not how Ganesha, that you actually make offerings to Ganesha in order to ask for the removal of obstacles rather than simply avoiding it.
Well, I think our biggest offering would be to meet the resistance, to not just ask him to fix the problem for us, but to actually do something to not have the problem anymore. Yeah. So that's where svadhyaya comes in, and the self-study. Yeah.
I also, speaking of svadhyaya, which I can't pronounce, I'm sorry. But I want to know how this is feeling for you now as you've made this shift. What are you noticing about what this feels like to be pressing these conversations a little quicker than you might have in the past? Has there been a resistance within you that you're having to overcome, or are you finding that now that you made this decision that you're comfortable with it, or are you becoming more comfortable with it?
No, the moment that the shift happened, for me, it was good, because I labor under the delusion that everything is my responsibility to fix, and it's a bit narcissistic to think that the entire world is going to fall apart if I can't fix it. Like, I can't fix it. That's not my job. I don't necessarily want to work with victims and people that constantly have axes to grind against the rest of the world, when honestly they're just not being productive enough to a solution. So where was I going? So for me, when that flip switched, and it was instigated by one situation, and when the flip switched, for me, it felt really good to know that, okay, it may still be ambiguous for that other person, but for me, it's clean and clear. I'm good. I don't have to carry this around anymore, and I won't carry it around anymore.
And it sounds like you've really made a decision to take care of yourself.
Yes, in that aspect, yes. Yes, to move away from the problem, to head towards a solution. And it's much more productive on every level. May not have been the solution that I would have chosen, but it's the solution that I have, and a solution is a solution. So, it's certainly better than the problem.
Yeah, I also wanted to then also talk about where are we, as far as for yourself, and working toward your own avoidance. Seems to me like that would be the deeper issue, would be to even become aware of the fact that you're avoiding something. And so how is that playing out for you personally to take this on, this resolution to, notice when you're avoiding things? What are you doing in order to address this for yourself?
Be clean and clear. So it really started with the clean and clear, and the avoidance was kind of like, okay, well, we love to avoid things. This is part of who we are. And I'm not against avoidance, but just avoid in a proper sense. So avoid by being clean and clear, and then you don't have a problem. It's for me, I don't want to be having an uncomfortable conversation that I could have avoided by having been clear with someone first. So you and I have an agreement to show up here on Tuesday nights and have our conversation. And if I tell you that I'm going to do that, but I'm actually going to show up late, or I'm going to, it's not going to make things clean and clear. You're not going, and I'm creating a problem. And I'll avoid that problem then that I've created by just pretending that it doesn't exist, but it does exist. And so if I'm clean and clear with you that, okay, I can do it one Tuesday a month rather than every Tuesday of the month, then it gives you something to work with for those other 3 weeks. So,
yeah, it's also a matter of honesty.
And it's super easy to do that, except for some people, again, are laboring under different ideologies that avoiding the problem is easier. We don't want to hurt people. But they don't seem to realize that you actually hurt them just as much, if not more, by not having the conversation you need to have.
You're clearly not a Southerner. In the South, they're very much about, sort of avoiding any conflict. And
very, yeah, which makes conflict or helps not have conflict.
And actually, my experience is that these things really grow a lot because issues aren't addressed. I mean, this is how I grew up. I grew up in Alabama, and it's just like you're not allowed to talk about certain things, and then they can't become resolved. When I moved up to New York and I saw people, go in and have these big sort of passionate conversations with each other, it just stunned me because I'd never seen people talk like that before.
Yeah.
But then they were able to remain friends afterward, and I thought, oh, this is such a relief once I got used to it, that people could actually be honest with each other and still have their friendships. And it wasn't like, oh, if we were to say the truth of the situation, that would then mean that we could no longer be friends. And I just hear it so often in the South where people there's a bitterness in relationships because people don't feel that they can address things outright, and they talk about each other behind each other's backs and things like that.
And that's not going to make any resolution. My father used to always say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so, choose your words wisely. Say whatever you need to say to me, but choose your words wisely and make sure that it's clean and that it's clear, because I'm going to probably have something to say back. Not every page has two sides, and every story has two sides. So if one person is frustrated, you have to understand that a second person is also frustrated, but can we come to terms with the frustration that neither one is worse? We just have to discuss what the trouble is, and then it's over. Then right. It's over. And but it's hard. It's hard to have those conversations. It's hard for us to look at ourselves, or it's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to be exposed. It's hard to, especially if you've had difficult situations growing up where you have this psychology that already you're this big and your voice matters this much. And so having that clean, clear conversation, some people just aren't parcel for. They're just not prepared for it.
Well, you seem clear to me. I notice a difference in you know, not that you haven't always brought a certain amount of clarity, but I do feel like there's been a shift in you and that I can perceive it. So I want us to go ahead and wrap up and let people know how they can get in touch with you to work with your Airbnb program, Meet the Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So how would somebody find that?
You can find it on Airbnb. I'm just plugging in. I'm sorry, I'm running low. You can find it on Airbnb Experiences, or you can find it on my website. It's on both. The Airbnb Experiences are a bit different in the sense that they're a 3.5-hour program designed for 4 people. So the time frame is around 4 people. And I send out a questionnaire that welcomes you, and you can respond with the specific ailments or afflictions that you want to be dealing with in class. I give you a little bit of experience of what I've dealt with so that you know the different areas of what I can help with or what I can't help with. And then we have our experience. If you're traveling in Montreal, it's a great idea, but I've also had regular Montrealers coming in for them. So it's worked out both ways.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's going well for you. We'll be putting links on the replay videos to Kara at Yoga Equanimity, as well as to the Airbnb. So if you're trying to get in touch with her, just look for those links. And then also she has a Facebook page, Yoga Equanimity. Thanks so much for being our guest. Namaste, Kara.
Thank you. Yeah, namaste.
Thank you.